My very first exposure to From Software's games was Bloodborne. And much like everyone else on the internet, I also wished for a remastered PC release and a sequel to it. Yet with almost a decade past since its release, my hope for either of these will cease completely if we aren't getting any information from PlayStation on its 10-year anniversary. However, I'm glad that Bloodborne's cult following influenced a developer enough to give us Lies of P, which in all implications of my next words is the spiritual sequel to Bloodborne I was hoping for when I saw its trailer and gameplay marketing material for the very first time. Yet, I wasn't prepared for how almost identical Lies of P's story and lore is to Bloodborne, but its mechanics being almost the inverse of it and more like an amalgamation of every Soulsborne game From Software has ever worked on. So join me in my deep dive into Lies of P, and let's align our brains with eyes to see how it is the Bloodborne sequel so many of us have craved for. Much like Bloodborne borrows from H.P. Lovecraft's stories, so too does Lies of P borrow from Bloodborne, following a tradition of using what came before as the base of inspiration for creating a unique world and player experience. To better see its almost identical lore structure to Bloodborne, let's take a look at the lore events happening before the start of the game. Once a mere speck on the map, the small fishing village of Quart was unremarkable until a discovery changed its destiny. The arrival of alchemists, drawn by the lure of a powerful relic known as Trismegistus, marked the beginning of a new era for Quart. Through its diligent study, the alchemist discovered and unlocked the secrets of Ergo, a potent energy source that held the promise of boundless possibilities. Realizing the potential of Ergo, the alchemist enlisted the aid of master craftsmen, including Geppetto and the to-be Prince of High Society Lorenzini Venini, whose skills would prove essential in harnessing this new energy. Under their combined expertise, Quart burgeoned into a hub of progress, weaving novel technologies into the fabric of daily life. And among its great inventions, the puppets were the greatest by far. But such rapid advancement did not go unnoticed. The prosperity of Quart captured the interest of surrounding nations and, more ominously, a secretive organization known for their devotion to eternal life. This organization is an agent named Philippus Paracelsus, who we later discover is none other than Giangio. Paracelsus, having infiltrated the circle of alchemists, covertly steered certain influential figures towards darker aspirations to start off what the organization called the Quart Experiment. One such figure was Simon Manus, a scholar and right-hand man to the alchemist's leader, whose moral compass was swayed to pursue unethical ergo experiments aimed at evolving humankind and creating a world of truth alone. However, these events began to transpire only when Valentinus Monarch, the initial leader of the alchemists and a fundamental pillar of Quart society through marriage to Isabel Monarch, suffered a tragic demise. The accident at the Wells estate, also known as the Monarch Charity House, was a catastrophe with far-reaching repercussions for all of Quart to come. It was also here that Valentinus and Isabel's daughter Sophia, who we meet at a hotel and acts as our firekeeper, was imprisoned by Simon to use her special ergo powers for his ambitions. Following Valentinus' death, the reins of leadership were passed to Simon Manus, who aggressively pushed the boundaries of ergo research, instilled a spiritual fervor among the alchemists that viewed him as a coming god, and allowed the petrification disease to spread more rapidly in Quart. As such, more and more carcasses began to emerge from the victims of the petrification disease, posing a dangerous threat to Quart and its citizens. Amidst this turmoil, Geppetto faced his own personal tragedy, caused by the loss of his son Carlo to the petrification disease. With his knowledge of the alchemist's inner workings and the power of their sacred relic, Geppetto concocted a desperate and mad plan out of grief. His objective throughout Lies of P is twofold. First and foremost, he is trying to resurrect his lost son. By planting Carlo's ergo into his greatest puppet, he stores his son's soul until the conditions of a second objective are met to transplant this puppet's heart into a human body again. His second objective was to cause a puppet frenzy and send his own army against the alchemists to stall them for some time to finish his preparations in a workshop terrain wagon. Through this, he not only cut off the creation of more carcasses by massacring every single person in Quad, but Geppetto also created the necessary chaos to thwart the alchemists, steal the arm of God from them to study it, and begin the process of releasing enough algo for the alchemists to gather, while also creating the perfect testing ground for us to become strong enough to face the alchemists' monsters and defeat them. For the entire first arc of our story, right up to the fight with the King of Puppets, serves as the ultimate test for Geppetto to see whether we are suited for the actual prey of this hunt we embark on. A hunt beginning when we awake in Geppetto's workshop wagon and start to witness the story of Lies of Peace through the eyes of Geppetto's creation. A puppet bearing the algo of his son in its heart. A puppet who will inevitably form its own algo known to us as P. Thus, our tale begins with P at the center, pulled by the threads of his puppet master, with his only true hope of freedom being ascension to humanity and achieving immortality as the byproduct, which is the ultimate goal of every involved faction. As we will now discuss further, Lies of P features an array of factions with parallel and even identical worlds found in Bloodborne's lore, albeit with their unique twists and narratives. The alchemists share the ambitious goals of the Healing Church, with Simon Manus as a character who, much like Lawrence, is obsessed with the idea of human evolution through the use of algo, serving as the equivalent of beast blood, mirroring the Church's experimentation with blood ministration and its dire consequences. Albeit not beasts, but carcasses roaming the streets of Quad, allowing and promoting the spread of the petrification disease, like the Holy Church didn't stop the beast plague by putting a stop to blood ministration. All of this started when the alchemists discovered ergo through the relic of Trismegistus, like the Bergenworth scholars discovered the beast blood in the Chalice dungeons. And with the alchemist's previous leader Valentinus Monad cautioning the alchemist's member to be wary of ergo and study it carefully, he has the same role as Master Willem. Just like Willem warned Lawrence and his students to always fear the old blood and only proceed to uncover the blood secrets with the necessary insight. The Stalkers and the Workshop are reminiscent of Bloodborne's hunters, having a similar purpose in hunting down the puppets and being servants of Quad's ruling classes, with the puppets being mass-produced hunters, like the Healing Church's hunters, created to combat the spread of the alchemist's carcasses. These groups are akin to how figures like German and Ludwig, aka Geppetto and the King of Puppets, led the hunters in the fight against the beasts. The church in Lies of P presents a parallel to Odeon Chapel, beginning as a sanctuary for refugees which, without our interference, ultimately transforms into a carcasses-infested area by the time we arrive, echoing the grim fate befalling Bloodborne's rescued NPCs where we make bad decisions. Carcasses are the tragic victims of the alchemists' ergo experimentations, turning into monstrosities through the petrification disease. It's a similar process as to how those afflicted by Bloodborne's blood ministration turn into beasts. However, the origin of this disease, as well as the power ergo provides, aren't fully explained to us. Hints at the origin point towards some entity that is similar to Bloodborne's Great Ones. Dimension God, or rather Four-Winged Angel, as well as the Arm of God, might be cell nuts to entities like the Moon Presence, which loom over Lies of Peace world akin to Bloodborne's narrative. Ergo and Golden Ergo could be seen as this game's equivalent of Beast Blood or Celestial Blood, which powers could originate from this game's Great Ones. Whilst, uniquely to Lies of Peace story however, Ergo representing the soul or rather the ego of a human being, which is something Geppetto manipulates akin to a Great One, but his character is much more similar to that of Gehrman. Geppetto's character is a complex reflection of Gehrman as the last obstacle we face at the end of the game. He is responsible for exacerbating Quad's tragic state through the puppet frenzy, driven by a deeply personal and ultimately selfish reason to revive his lost son Carlo. Just like Gehrman is responsible for creating the Hunter's Dream by summoning the Moon Presence and subjugating himself and countless other hunters to this nightmare. And lastly, Sophia's character resembles the doll in Bloodborne, which becomes indisputable in the true ending named Rise of P. Like the doll, Sophia plays a crucial role in guiding the player. But she sets herself apart from her inspiration with her very own enigmatic past, as well as her purpose being deeply woven into the game's story and climax, which is the last noteworthy similar character to the ones we find in Bloodborne. As you witness for yourselves, this assortment of characters and factions reinforces the game's thematic resonance with Bloodborne, while standing on its own as a unique and darkly captivating world based on Pinocchio's tale. In fact, they did it so well that I had to actively reference Bloodborne's story whilst playing the game in order to see all of these parallels between both stories. Since without that, I probably wouldn't have noticed similarities between the characters and factions of both games, which is a testimony to the quality of the narrative's execution and the incorporation of enough distinctive aspects to create a unique story and lore for us to enjoy. And the studio absolutely nailed it. Just like its core theme that is underlying every story arc and NPC side quest. At its core, the game's narrative and NPC side missions are tackling the theme of family, emphasizing that the essence of the story is the exploration of humanity in its many aspects. Next to the topic of human behavior and humanity's desire for ascension, the game has a strong focus on the various facets of family relationships, ranging from the dynamics of different family relations, portrayed through the side quests of characters such as the sibling relations between Eugene and Alodoro, the Red Fox and the Black Cat, Romeo and Carlo, as well as the sisters Elena and the White Lady. And let's not forget the romantic relationships of Polendina and Antonia, Julian the gentleman and his puppet wife, plus the tragic soldier story between Belle and her lover Atkinson. All of these examples offer us a deep dive into the many facets of family ties that bind individuals, be it two humans or a puppet and a human, together. They explore the spectrum of human emotions and relationships. From the joy and complexity of family bonds, how on one hand you try not to hurt them by telling lies, yet also being capable of hurting them the most, all the way to the pain and horror of loved ones suffering, dying, or turning into monsters. All of these stories serve as a learning experience for P in his quest to transform from a puppet into a human and transcend the mortal realm, representing the search for individuality, autonomy, and belonging, which are defining fundamental human experiences. As such, Lies of P is not only echoing Bloodborne's ultimate quest of transcending into a great one here, but also possesses three endings with roughly similar narrative outcomes like in Bloodborne. The quote-unquote bad ending allows the status quo to exist further, which is triggered by submitting to Gehrman or Geppetto in either game. The quote-unquote default ending brings change and resolution to the universe, but not in a satisfying way. And only the true ending brings the change and transformation the characters, and ultimately the world, needed, revealing the deeper lore and ultimate fates of the characters involved. But next to its many lore parallels to Bloodborne, Lies of P's world design was also inspired from Bloodborne's art direction and atmosphere in order to create a unique feeling world that allows us to explore its lore and stories. If you still aren't convinced about the blatant similarity Lies of P has with Bloodborne, then let us take a closer look at the level progression of the game. The aesthetics of the game's levels and even the initial progression draws a heavy influence from Bloodborne. It too has a distinct Victorian-era theme, which is underscored by the emergence of electricity and steam-powered machinery to distinct itself. We journey at the start through the streets of Quart until we reach Moonlight Town and a cathedral above it, much like we go through Yharnam streets until we get to the cathedral ward and the forsaken corners of Old Yharnam below it. Old Yharnam is reimagined in Lies of P as the Moonlight Town at the basis of a mountain with its St. Francesco Cathedral perched atop the mountain. Plus, significant story progression is tied to the Archbishop Andreas, a boss monster with a religious background, identical to how the defeat of Vicar Emilia progresses Bloodborne's story. Where the identical progression between both games begins to end is also not here though, with Rome being the next to unravel more of Bloodborne's story and secrets. Its equivalent in Lies of P is the King of Puppets. But before coming face to face with either of them, you have to overcome a boss gang fight. And I'm sure that I don't have to spell out the names of these Shadows of Yharnam to seasoned Bloodborne connoisseurs. Nor remind you of a gang fight with 4 dark-clothed stalkers in the Marlum district. And with us defeating the King of Puppets, and by extension ending the puppet frenzy, it unveils the secret of the carcasses being the actual threat to Quart. Similar to how Realm's death unveiled the Mensis ritual, in all of its horrific aspects, which reshapes previously visited areas into frightening nightmares. This change is not only an enormous shift in aesthetics, but also a reminder that our actions have rippling consequences in this world, shown to us by estranging familiar places and infusing them with new threats. What Lies of P does here in its art direction is identical to how with Realm's death the Lovecraftian horror in Bloodborne begins to unfold before our insight-filled eyes. Lies of P unexpectedly also delves into the theme of human experimentation, exemplified first by our encounters with Champion Victor and the Alchemist goons at a grand exhibition. This bears some similarity to Bloodborne's introduction to human experimentations in the research halls of the Clock Tower, which is better represented via the Isle of Alchemist's Upper Abbey area. Both areas radiate a chilly obsession with transcendental aspirations, and much like me at first, I hope you are as shocked as well to find such a massively similar story progression from Bloodborne in Lies of P. However, the design of Lies of P's interconnected areas within the game's first half is also noteworthy. Borrowing, in fact, a bit from the level design of Dark Souls' first half, where from Undead Burg and Blighttown, several shortcuts lead back to Firelink Shrine. As of Elysian Boulevard, the next 4 levels ingeniously loop back to Hollow Quart, giving us a quote-unquote guided tour of Quart and its surrounding area. Which isn't something I expected to happen, but pleasantly surprised me during my first playthrough. And much like its level design being inspired by Bloodborne and partially Dark Souls, so too is it the case for the atmosphere of the entire game. It has a similar grim and oppressive tone, where we get plunged into a catastrophic outbreak that marks the onset of a dystopian nightmare. Unlike the cyclical nature of Bloodborne, where the Beast Hunt at night is an already firmly established event when we enter Yharnam, this narrative feels fresher, since it is starting right at the brink of Quart's societal collapse and pulling us into a new, horrifying abyss with each new chapter. As the story progresses, the atmosphere exponentially darkens, seamlessly shifting further and further into an horrendous nightmare with each new carcass enemy type. It is much like how Bloodborne later on in the story introduced its Lovecraftian monsters to us, in form of the Great Ones, to hunt down and defeat. This progression in Lies of P not only reflects the deteriorating state of the world within the game, but also layers each new development with a creeping dread that underscores the terror unfolding before us, ensuring that the fear and the stakes grow with every advancing move we make, just like in Bloodborne. Yet, one aspect Lies of P falls significantly shorter than Bloodborne lies within its music. Personally, I did not find a single track, focusing particularly on the boss music here, to be memorable for me. Each track certainly fulfilled its purpose as adequate background music, but that's all the boss music was to me. Just background noise, which I couldn't even explain as to why that is to you, since I have zero knowledge whatsoever when it comes to analyzing or understanding music. My best guess is that the music doesn't hit the necessary tune for me to engage the respective boss in a deadly dance masked as the boss fight. However, this doesn't mean that I want to criticize and frame the composer for the game's music as incompetent. One music aspect I really enjoyed is the selection of records we can listen to in the hotel. Not only did the people behind them show a great talent by including different music genres, but the developers have also introduced a clever element to further transform the hotel into a welcoming sanctuary amidst the chaos unfolding in Quart. The music within the safe zone gives a homely feel to the hotel, providing an enhanced sense of security and comfort that starkly contrasts the rest of the game, which is something I hope to see again in Lies of P's sequel or in other similar games. Also surprising in its varying quality are Lies of P's mechanics. Although similar to Bloodborne and the Soulsborne genre overall, they are the biggest differentiating factor from its inspirational source. Some are great, others are meh, and a few are honestly really bad. Lies of P's most unique mechanic in any Soulsborne game is telling lies to NPCs that influence the whole narrative. As is the case for the original story of Pinocchio, lies play a major role in this story as well, in form of dialogue choices, influencing and transforming P into a human when he is telling enough lies or engages in other human behaviors. The narrative is deeply intertwined with the decision of either lying and making use of one of mankind's greatest talents, or remain a quote-unquote good boy and stay within the puppet realm of our puppet master. Each choice of telling lies or truths echoes the complexity of outcomes found in FromSoft's games, albeit with a timer to put more pressure onto us as well as challenging us to make pivotal decisions within a set time frame and live with its consequences should we have made the wrong choice. And don't be mistaken that these choices don't have deadly consequences. Only with enough lies does P gain enough humanity to be able to choose which ending we wish to see at the end. This is a genius play on the developer's part to make use of lies in a completely different way than the original story. For the act of lying isn't inherently monstrous or inhumane like a puppet, but a representation of mankind's free will to make their own choices. Presenting P with each conversation the option of either staying a puppet without a free will or regain his humanity back, which makes each NPC interaction meaningful since it influences how the story will unfold in its final act. Also a genius move of the developers is to hide a spoiler in plain sight, telling us that lying is necessary to see the true ending. When we die, we see the catchphrase lie or die. Without any knowledge about the endings, you will only see this as a funny pun on the "you died" banner. However, when having completed your first playthrough, you start to see it in a completely different way and recognize it as a developer telling you to gain more humanity to come to a satisfying story conclusion. Which took me a while to realize, but it shows us how meticulous the devs were when planning and executing this game. This meticulous approach is also evident in Lies of P's other mechanics, albeit not as good as the standards of an actual FromSoftware game, and their quality is all over the place. Its arguably biggest issue, and what infuriated me the most, is how the game handles dodging. P's dodges didn't feel right to me right from the start. It felt clunky and unresponsive, which I soon realized was a consequence of the total carry rate system in place, which is a system I didn't expect to find. I assumed that the game won't have a carry rate function like Bloodborne. And also surprising to me was that the ability to perform a double dodge, an essential maneuver for my dex build, had to be unlocked through upgrades via Geppetto's chair, revealing the game's in-depth upgrade system. As such, the game forces us to make a trade-off between damage absorption and dodge efficiency, where you have to carefully consider equipment choices and what playstyle is more important to you. Though in this delicate balancing act, the huge reach afforded by having less than 30% equip load was more valuable to me than the ability to take 1 or 2 more hits. And the difference in reach of a dodge between under and above 30% is extreme. What's also pretty bad for managing the weight limit is the absurd weight of some items. It's particularly problematic for critical items like Legion arms, weapons, and boss talismans. Especially boss talismans, which have really great buffs for the most part, are sometimes essential yet burdensome to dex builds, because they're ludicrously heavier than the normal talismans for no apparent reason. And even if you manage your equipment weight to be below 30%, dodging still doesn't guarantee you to evade damage of red charging attacks. This is only allowed via a boss talisman, which again requires a huge investment in equipment management, increasing your capacity stat and removing other critical items you might need more. And the only alternative to surviving such attacks is to parry them. All of this results in an initial playstyle where I had to minimize equipment gear and effectively play naked in order to preserve the viability of dodging. Such an extremely forced strategy highlights not only the system's need for recalibration, but also the next major issue with dodging. Because adding to the challenge of using dodges is the imposed delay after the second dodge. Its design choice is reminiscent of the recent God of War games, who employ an identical dodge system. But this artificial pause interrupted the flow of combat for me several times to such a degree that the second successive dodge became more of a hindrance than a viable strategy, detracting from the otherwise smooth and responsive controls you have and also require to keep up with the game's demand for precisely executed actions. The dodge delay is something I hope the devs decide to remove and allow for the stamina-tied chain back-to-back dodging system like in any other Soulsborne game. As to why they haven't simply copied Bloodborne's dodge mechanic is beyond me, but more about such design choices later. Though, despite my issues with dodging and the weight limit in the game, it also serves as a very immersive story narrative tool, because it showcased the ascension of a clumsy new puppet into the strongest puppet of all. The narrative arc of P, who Geppetto made to be the most sophisticated, powerful, and autonomous puppet, unfolds in a journey of discovery and understanding of humanity. P starts off as an intricate automaton bound by the limitations of its unrefined mechanical form. However, through P organ upgrades, each acting as a catalyst for new abilities, P's evolution is not just functional, but symbolic, mirroring the transformation from a puppet to a human with a beating heart. Within the few upgrades, he can move and dodge on par with a human. As such, in a sense, those P organ upgrades allow P to get the heart and human-like body he requires to become human. This progression is also ingeniously reflected in the game's mechanic, where each human action taken by P catalyzes a physical transformation towards his humanity, hinting at a deeper allegory of ascension akin to the themes explored in Bloodborne and in previous chapters. The transformation is also tangible, with the most noticeable changes being the growth and color of P's hair. And as P's journey continues, the enhancements to his P organ go beyond mere superficial additions. They become transformative steps in P's quest to transcend its original design. This metamorphosis speaks to the game's larger narrative of elevation from the state of a crafted being to one that is unmistakably human. Plus, with the addition of P's newly found immortality during this process, we could also come to a conclusion of him having become the quote-unquote perfect human being. As a result, this mechanic serves the game's exploration of the essence of what it means to be a human in a world where the lines between organic and artificial lives are blurred. And also a nice touch-up on the game's lore is an explanation for P resurrecting after death, which ties this mechanic into Lies of P's narrative quite well. It is revealed that Sophia harnesses the power of Ergo to manipulate time, with which she sets time back to a point where P hasn't died yet. I really like that the devs added this explanation, since it lends a sense of seamless coherence and depth to the planning and execution of the game, instead of just dismissing it as a standard gameplay mechanic. And Lies of P provides yet another parallel to Bloodborne, which also gives us an explanation as to why our hunter cannot die. Unique to Lies of P, however, is having a sidekick. Gemini, in his role as a sidekick, brings a valuable dynamic to the game. He gives his own opinions on the surroundings and acts as a comic relief to loosen up the immense tension a bit. Yet he shares a common shortfall like with Melina in Elden Ring. The infrequency of his interactions with us led to me forgetting that I have this companion in the first place, which eventually also happened with Melina. It would be beneficial to Gemini's role to act as a more active commentator, such as providing commentary during boss fights, and be more talkative throughout the levels. This would not only reinforce his presence, as always being by our side, but also enrich our experience of having a sidekick. Mimir, from the latest God of War games, actually strikes this balance perfectly. However, any increase in dialogue during a boss fight should be carefully measured, so that it actually enhances the gameplay rather than becoming an annoyance and a distraction. Moreover, Gemini's backstory adds a layer of intrigue to his character. Like P, he was once human and now finds himself confined within a puppet's body. This shared fate could have been an interesting story, but seems to be an underused narrative thread. With Sophia stating that Gemini is very special, yet I didn't get this sense at all from him. By fleshing out his character's role and interactions with us, Gemini could have been an even better and memorable character, plus companion, than he currently is. Well, maybe he'll get this treatment in Lies of P's DLC. But what needs a massive overhaul on the other hand is the cube and its usage. The cube, in its intended purpose, draws inspiration from the wondrous physics flask from Elden Ring, promising to offer a similar advantage in combat encounters. Yet, in practice, the cube falls short of its mark. In fact, its long casting time and lack of compelling benefits failed to present me with a compelling case for its use. The return on investment for engaging with the cube's mechanics while spending gold coin foods never lived up to the level of utility that other consumable items provided. Which is why I disregarded it already in my first playthrough and never bothered to engage with it again. I never saw a compelling incentive to use it other than its inspiration, the wondrous physics flask. And adding to its uselessness, the majority of the cube's stones only buff the spectre you can summon for a boss fight. If it came with more wish stones that had more and better effects on my character, for example increasing the damage for a specific amount of time, or granting temporary immunity to any elements, then the cube would have been an alright feature. But this lack of utility for the cube had also a butterfly effect. It renders the gold coin foods, which are meant to be exchanged for stones to power the cube, equally redundant. Since the cube itself never became a much used tool in my playthroughs, it and the gold coin foods were essentially a useless feature to me, due to lacking a compelling reason to utilize it. They became as such untouched inventory items, underscoring its inadequacy and uselessness within the game. Let me know in the comments on how and whether you guys have used the cube in your playthroughs, or whatever else you want to share. Another feature that immensely annoyed me is the automatic closing of messages. I always lacked adequate time to thoroughly read and understand the lore provided by these messages linked to game objects. Always, at roughly 3/4 of any text, the pop-up window closed, and to reopen it, I had to annoyingly take some steps back for the prompt to reappear again so that I could finish reading the message. Whoever thought that this would make for a better user experience, in context of many players complaining about the messages in Elden Ring interfering with combat, has absolutely missed the mark here. The more user-friendly approach is for players to manually close messages. It ensures that anyone has enough time to read the message's content without feeling rushed and annoyed by the interface's behavior. Also, while I'm on a rant, I'm calling caps on the 2023 Game Awards for not nominating Lies of P as GOTY. It has the best character ever in any game! Spring, the cat in Hotel Quad. Just look at this adorable little creature, acting up for not letting me pet it and acting all feisty when I try to approach her. Why? Just why won't you let me pet you? Why did they have to recreate cats so damn well? Jokes aside now, the cat actually has an important function, which isn't to just give the hotel a more comfy and homey feeling. Spring acts as another barometer for P's humanity level. The more human P gets, the more the cat is willing to engage in affectionate interactions like getting petted and being whole, showing that Spring is hostile to puppets, but is more receptive to gestures of affection from humans. It's a humorous and yet another clever nod to the player, indicating how human we as P have become, next to the piano or the P organ pop-up messages, which are all ideas I love. It is great that it has decided to give us so many indicators for letting us know the progress of the most important step in the entire game, dictating which ending we are going to get. Also, another great mechanic is that you don't have to prep shortcuts in Lies of P like in any other FromSoft game. The game actually keeps track of our level progress and resets the shortcuts to be immediately available when spawning at the stargazes closest to them. At first, I was annoyed that I couldn't prep the shortcuts like I'm used to in any other FromSoft title. However, I had a hunch that the shortcuts reset it automatically, which I eventually confirmed to be true. I really like this design choice since it allows for a smoother and more enjoyable gameplay flow to get back faster to the boss. It may be a small, but definitely a significant quality of life adjustment that enhances the overall player experience. And now, I kinda wish we would get this in future FromSoft games too, if their proprietary engine allows for such a function, of course. Lies of P also does Souls fashion great in their own way. We don't wear armor dictating our defense stats, but instead use internal parts herefore. This approach cleverly ensures that we can indulge in personalizing the appearance of P without compromising on practicality. Also great is that each of the 4 parts is responsible for handling specific damage types. It is not only a great organizing approach, but also allows us to be quicker informed about our defensive capabilities at a glance, which is something I desperately needed to make my dex build work. A downer is that the available outfits and accessories weren't that great when I finished playing it right before the patch, which included more options. Yet from what I saw from these new additions, I still dig the variety and aesthetic of From Software's armor designs more. I wasn't really a fan of just finding stalker attire, which was patched up and dirty or sometimes looking like clown attire. FromSoft's fashion peaked in Bloodborne throughout, and we haven't got anything on par in Lies of P. But this is just a personal preference, and as long as the game includes one great option for a black attire, I'm already happy. But for everything that is great about the handling of armor and outfits, I have a few gripes with Lies of P's weapons. The game's repertoire of high-quality dex weapons is notably lacking, which disappoints me. It again really feels like the game sometimes forces you to only play in a certain way and takes away from you the opportunity to decide how you want to tackle a certain boss fight. The sentiment of lacking great dex weapons persisted for me until I discovered the katana at the end of Chapter 8. And I wouldn't be surprised if they put all of their efforts in making this one ultimate dex weapon instead of creating a couple of high quality ones. Because this moment felt equivalent to me obtaining Lady Maria's weapon in Bloodborne. Mainly because both swords feel great to swing and are guarded by obnoxiously difficult enemies. The two dragon sword to this day stands out as the singular dex weapon in the entire game that combined the necessary swiftness and impact required for a formidable dex build, which highlighted to me again how the overall weapon arsenal speed is unsatisfactory. While it is correct for great swords and giant clubs to have slow and sluggish swings, lighter swords with their attacks are stained by a slight yet perceptible delay between swings. And this is particularly jarring as it also contradicts the established lore, next to annoying weapon gameplay, suggesting that a puppet's strength can turn a sawtooth wheel into a deadly projectile. Yet, that very same puppet struggles to execute two light sword attacks with a fast pace back to back. Despite these discrepancies, the game's weapon assembly system is a silver lining that can easily rectify some of these issues. Since it allows us, for example, to break away from the monotonous thrusts of rapiers and daggers that typically define dex weapons. By changing the handle, we can influence the blade's motion and speed, thus fine-tuning the combat feel to a more personal preference. While this system deserves commendation for its originality and depth throughout the Souls-like genre, I honestly found little motivation to delve into the nuances of the system and utilize it. I think the system's potential remains largely untapped due to a lack of compelling incentives for me to experiment with many different assemblies. If there were more engaging reasons to experiment with the weapon assembly, like for example a plethora of different fable arts, prominently different attack variants, and having more unique as well as better movesets for weapons in general, I then might find myself more invested in the feature and eagerly exploring the multitude of combat styles it can unlock. Yet, even if these features were implemented in a sequel, the core issue could still remain. If the weapon doesn't feel instinctively right and responsive in the player's hands, it will be cast aside in favor of something more attuned to their style. Because players will invariably gravitate towards equipment that complements their playstyle and feels right to them, while disregarding any weapon that fails to resonate with the concept of combat fluidity. And it is in Bloodborne that nails this balance between all of these aspects. While having very few trick weapons, each weapon got extensive amount of work put into them to give each the perfect and proper feel they need. In reducing the quantity a bit, addressing their tactile feedback, and improving the handling of weapons, I'm certain that such future enhancements to the sequel are going to significantly improve the game's weapon quality and unlock the full potential of the assembly system. However, not everything related to the weapons in Lies of P is bad. The feature of destroying enemy and boss weapons is a pretty cool idea. This mechanic significantly rewards players who have mastered parrying by giving them the satisfaction of breaking down enemies' weapon through a skillful defense and putting enemies at a significant disadvantage. It's a testament to the work that went into the game's combat design that such a feature not only exists, but also rewards player proficiency. And the addition of a visual indicator tracking the degradation of enemy weapons is another thoughtful touch, providing immediate and tangible feedback on the weapon destruction progress in battle. Plus, the sound of a perfect parry was definitely nailed in this game. These visual and audio cues ensure that we are always getting feedback to adjust our combat tactics accordingly, making it a cool and practical feature that enhances the overall gameplay experience. Which is, unfortunately, also an indicator for the somewhat forced upon playstyle I discussed earlier in regards to my issue with how dodging works in this game. While the story and lore are definitely inspired by Bloodborne, Lies of P's combat on the other hand feels to me way more inspired by Sekiro. Although, Instead of being purely one combat style, it feels more like a mix of these two with unique additions like the Legion Arm, Fable Arts, or even how weapon durability is handled. Particularly, the implementation of weapon durability, and especially how we fix it, is nothing short of genius in Lies of P. It's arguably the most intelligently handled system of its kind that I've ever experienced in any game. The ability to repair weapons on the go is an exceptionally great feature, brilliantly accommodating the need for weapon maintenance without disrupting the flow of our adventure through Quad. It ensures that we don't have to go back to the hotel to seek out your genius repair shop. Instead, we can attend to our equipment whenever the situation allows us to do so. Moreover, the act of sharpening weapons while in the field enhanced for me the feel of being a hunter on an actual hunt. It actually made me believe to be a predator in pursuit of its prey, sharpening my fangs for the upcoming fight. This not only adds a layer of great immersion to the game, but also eliminates the annoyance of tending and having to pay a shop to fix a weapon's durability in so many different games. This mechanic creates a seamless and engaging player experience from start to finish of a level in Lies of P, and surpasses by far the weapon durability handling in Bloodborne. Also, what surprised me throughout my time with the game is that just like in Bloodborne, the game is rife with plenty of ambushes. Some are easy to spot for veterans, others are devious, and a specific few are extremely sadistic. There were instances where the game quite literally pulled the floor from right under me, which left me shocked quite a few times. The perfect example herefore is in the Barren Swamp village, where on a seemingly innocent platform lies an item. The moment you fall onto it is where the floor unexpectedly gives way to leave nothing but a narrow pole as a lifeline. Not gonna lie, my heart stopped there for a solid second, since it definitely was a trap I didn't expect. This instance is one other perfect example for me to know that the devs understood their assignment when they set out to create a Souls-like. However, not all ambushes are created equal, and the following one is just utter bullshit. After a tedious run through an area in Chapter 11, you will come across this pole with an item on it. You're not expecting an ambush since there's nothing visible inside that could hurt you, right? However, just one level higher, a Gatling gun enemy lurks in wait to shoot you off into your death. It is so outright diabolical that it deserves an A-grade bullshit rating. Luckily, I've unlocked the shortcut beforehand so that I didn't have to go through the same area again. So I wasn't that mad about it. But I'm sure that this particular ambush also got many other, and probably more unprepared, players. Serving as such as a stark reminder that even the most seasoned players can be caught off guard in the most cunning and unforgiving setups in Lies of P. As such, a heartfelt fuck you goes out to the person setting up this ambush. And congratulations. You've shown again that you understood the assignment, so good job. However, what I cannot comprehend or the thoughts behind them is our reliance on attack tracking, particularly the harsh projectile tracking. It's annoying as hell how accurately projectiles bend to hit you after a dodge. The game's tracking mechanic is especially overtuned when it comes to the Gatling gunman's projectiles. Their relentless accuracy and staggering effect can kill you without any chance of survival when being staggered by them, and guarding gets hindered by this relentless staggering effect. The unyielding precision of their projectiles, especially how they can alter their trajectory about 45 degrees mid-flight, is annoying to such a degree that it can't be considered fair. The challenge it presents strays from a test of skill to an ordeal that is more of a gamble. A gamble of which its outcome depends on whether you have enough stamina to dodge in a 45-degree angle towards the gunman several times, or whether your guard is strong enough to block all projectiles. Adjusting the tenacity of enemy projectiles and the staggering effect would go a long way in striking a better balance between difficulty and fairness, offering us a better fighting chance to outmaneuver attacks using skillful dodges rather than sheer luck or brute force. This aggressive tracking is not just a problem with the projectiles of these gunmen, but also extends to certain bosses, which I plan to discuss in more details later. But since we are getting into the topics of enemies and bosses, let's talk about their universally biggest problem. The game's balance between enemies and bosses' HP, as well as the damage output from various weapon builds, is significantly imbalanced. An issue that became even more pronounced to me in New Game Plus. While the game's combat design allows for extremely powerful combinations of Fable arts and Legion weapons for moments of high DPS, the damage of regular attacks with our primary melee weapon barely makes a dent into a boss's HP. This imbalance is particularly disheartening when I, for example, carefully timed my dodges to wait for an opening to only see that attack yielded negligible damage against the boss's HP bar. The sense of futility that comes from slowly chipping away at a behemoth of HP pool, only to see an inconsequential impact on its health, can be more disappointing and annoying than the anticlimactic quick defeat of a boss. Although improvements have been made since the game's initial release, the issue still remains a thorn in the side of the game since I last played it in mid-November of 2023. I continuously observed that, despite fully upgraded weapons, their attack potency against bosses' HPs doesn't always hit the mark of a well-tuned challenge. I genuinely hope that the studio continues to improve on this, leading hopefully to a more rewarding and consistently balanced combat experience in Lies of P sequel and DLC. And next to this, Lies of P also has some, let's just say, very interesting enemy encounters filled with issues. For starters, the encounter with the kid puppet in Section 8 left a very lasting impression on me. I now successfully hate kids for the rest of my life. Its hitboxes are absolute shit, and the tracking of its attacks, especially the grabbing ones, are so mind-boggling dumb that I have absolutely no idea how anyone in QA greenlit this enemy. Plus, the issue of ridiculous HP pulls is shown again with the kid puppet. It serves as a great example as to how unfair and annoying an enemy becomes when it isn't properly balanced. Every time I encountered this puppet, I got annoyed to the point where I hoped that my Fable Arts and Legion Arm do enough damage so that the fight ends within seconds. But in most cases, I had to fight it head-on in order to win, putting me through an unfair and annoying enemy encounter with no great loot as a reward. In general, the larger, tougher enemies who kinda act as mini-bosses like in Sekiro keep dragging on sometimes without an OP build doing massive DPS. And is even more apparent when using a standard weapon that doesn't do much damage while it's almost completely upgraded. I get it that the devs have to account for the many ways in which players use their available resources to tackle combat encounters so that the challenge and fairness of each encounter is preserved. However, just slapping ridiculous amounts of HP onto these mini-bosses wasn't a fun experience for me, especially during my first playthrough. This point of the gameplay, as well as the damage of all possible utilities available to the player, requires more fine-tuning and overhauling in updates, the DLC, as well as its sequel to keep and make fights challenging while not excessively drawing them out to the point of being annoying. In summary, Lies of P's mechanics aren't on the same level as Bloodborne and even have mechanics from other Souls games in them. While the quality of its mechanics vary greatly, it's because the studio doesn't have by far the vast amount of experience FromSoft has accumulated over a decade. But these are all solvable issues with enough experience to make them better in future installments of Lies of P. Additionally, they also introduce unique mechanics in the Soulspawn genre, like weapon assembly, the Legion arms, and weapon durability, among others. Also, with nothing to compare against to make use of already existing experience, proving again the skills of the devs for making such a great yet flawed game that is their first attempt in a Souls-like genre. However, the biggest aspect of the game, whose quality is definitely all over the place, are the bosses. It is by far the biggest area the devs have to improve their skills. Let's talk about some of the best and worst bosses Lies of P has to offer. And any boss I'm not covering here was just an okay boss without any major positive or negative issues. First is the boss who has infuriated me the most in my first playthrough. The Swamp Monster, who essentially showcases all the major problems the game had when I played it. The impressions I left this boss with in my new game run were that the aggressive behavior of it seemed tailored exclusively for dex builds to dodge perfectly or for parry gods. Yet with my dex build, I had immense difficulties inflicting enough damage and to dodge its attacks properly, due to the narrow boss arena and the bad choreography of its attacks. Its bloated health pool, where the damage limitations of my nearly fully upgraded starter weapon became painfully apparent, was an additional point of frustration for me. It made me believe that this was a bullshit fight the devs made difficult just for the sake of presenting an unfair challenge and getting the Souls-like label for the game. This feeling was more amplified by the unnecessary debris shrinking the overall space in the boss arena. With space too confined for the scale of the presented boss battle, I often found myself cornered, lacking the necessary room to execute evasive maneuvers effectively, or got stuck in invisible walls. It made me wish for Victor's Arena to at least get to the level of a fair chance, since it offers the perfect example for how spacious a boss arena should be to allow for any tactical approach without unnecessarily limiting the player's movement. Furthermore, by simply removing or at least minimizing the environmental debris within this arena, one of the fight's biggest issues would have already been solved. The clutter not only restricted my movement, but also interrupted the flow of the boss fight due to me getting stuck between the boss and the debris multiple times. So yeah, the massive HP pool, the lack of space, and the bullshit attacks of this boss primed me to shit all over this boss in this video. However, my experience fighting it in New Game Plus actually contradicts my New Game experience so significantly to stop me from doing so. With my perfected dex build, I did adequate enough damage in my fight throughout, while I should also add that my skill level at this point far surpassed that of my New Game run, because I finally got the perfect dex build that felt right to me. I still got stuck during this fight between the boss and the debris, yet had enough pulse cells and skill to manage this situation better, which resulted in me actually defeating the swamp monster within my first try in New Game Plus. While I was surprised and pleased by this, it got me thinking as to why this happened. And I came to the conclusion that the previously mentioned issues regarding the disparity between damage output and high enemy HP pools somewhat got better within New Game Plus. It offered me an overall more balanced experience than my first playthrough and proved itself, again, as an overall great game. This boss is yet again another proof that the core combat mechanics still require more fine-tuning to provide a fair challenge across all playstyles and builds, but they already work better than most other Souls-like games. And it thus are certainly capable of creating fair and challenging bosses, with the previous boss Victor being a great example for one of the best bosses in the game. His attacks provide an adequate challenge to deal with and are extremely satisfying to dodge. Plus, the choreography of his combat moves is extremely well executed. The seamless integration of his attack patterns allows for an intuitive sense of when and how to dodge or parry him, which resulted in the creation of a perfect dance between me and him that felt very good to engage in, showcasing their skills to create good boss fights. Proven yet again when we take a look at the Black Rebel Brotherhood and the novel ideas they've had when creating them. The Black Rebel Brotherhood is an encounter that could easily be classified as nightmare fuel, even for hardened Soulsborne veterans. Instead of a duo, we face 4 enemies at once, and each boss exhibits a distinct build. This boss fight isn't just a skill check in form of the most difficult boss up to this point in the game for new players. It is also a uniquely cool and memorable boss fight thanks to its originality and the fine-tuned balance of its AI. While daunting at first, this fight is actually a manageable challenge, since no more than 2 enemies attack us at any given time, preventing the battle as such from descending into chaos and being unfair. Also something that's implemented well here, but horrible in other boss fights, is how it tracks the first brother during a leaping strike. This dynamic camera movement provides the necessary clarity to react to the boss's actions instead of having to rely on guesswork about what and when he will do something in this situation. It's a feature that I appreciate and one I would have benefited the Laxasia's second boss phase as well. More about her later. Overall, the fight against the Black Rebel Brotherhood was a thrilling and most importantly memorable experience that I thoroughly enjoyed. It's blending the right amounts of fear, challenge, and dopamine as a reward for overcoming this obstacle. As such, this gang boss is the most outstanding boss idea of the entire game. And since I recall it, when I think about Lies of Peace bosses, well after having moved on to the next game, the Black Rebel Brotherhood serves as a perfect example for a remarkably executed boss fight with a novel and great idea. The King of Puppets Romeo is another of the game's bosses, deserving of a few words. As the mid-game mark, it presents a formidable challenge with a fight that prominently tests our reflexes in Phase 2. I find it a fine and occasionally good fight, which is unfortunately held back by some poorly telegraphed attacks in his second phase. I was struggling to anticipate some of his moves, and the speed of his sequential attacks were also a bit too fast for me. This lack of clear and perceivable attacks resulted in me getting mixed signals from the boss, which made it harder for me to discern the boss's attack patterns. But despite these difficulties, the first phase of the fight can be greatly simplified by mastering a handful of perfect parries. This boss highlights again my complaints about dodging not being a viable player option in Lies of P. So many other boss encounters can be trivialized by being a parry god, which begs the question of whether the devs leaned more into Sekiro when creating the game's combat system. Dodging doesn't seem like a viable tactic in either of Romeo's phases, due to the nature of his onslaught in his second phase, and a huge coverage of his attacks in phase 1. As you can see, I parried Romeo in phase 1 consistently and finished this phase extremely fast. Whereas if I tried to dodge him, I would be either hit by his attacks or not have enough time between his last and follow-up attack to land a hit. In spite of these challenges though, the fight against Romeo still remained an enjoyable one for me. The fight's intensity and the satisfaction of overcoming it marks Romeo as a good boss in the game. The only so far unmentioned section of memorable bosses are the ones we fight in chapter 11, where each boss presents their own uniquely challenging fight. Challenging for great, but also horrible reasons. The first proper boss we face on the Isle of Alchemists is Laxasia. When designing Laxasia, the devs probably got so inspired that they thought Nameless King goes Her first phase offers such a remarkably balanced difficulty that this phase is executed to perfection. I love to dodge her attacks, they are clearly choreographed and manageable to either dodge or parry. The devs should use this first phase as a template for designing future bosses due to her dodging or parrying approach being equally viable. And the only stain in this phase is the extremely harsh attack tracking in her chained together charged attacks. This first phase starkly contrasts the outright horrible second phase of her, which can be summarized in an interesting idea's execution, poorly thought out. Her second phase ramps up the challenge excessively by just ridiculously increasing her speed, whilst making attack tracking even harsher and more punishing. I absolutely couldn't keep up with what is happening in her second phase. Before I could process what she just had done, she was already in the midst of a follow-up attack that killed me already. That's how bad this fight's tempo is. Especially her aerial maneuvers, particularly the slamming attack, are the worst. I cannot discern what she is doing, since for one, the camera doesn't track her like the first brother in the Black River Brotherhood boss fight, and her aerial attacks are poorly choreographed throughout. In one moment she is frozen in place mid-air, and in the next she is back on the ground with full force.
Yay!
As such, dodging them at the right time is impossible and just outright bullshit. I saw someone defeating her with parries alone, mad respect to that dude. But the fact that, again, a boss is trivialized by parries and obviously designed more with that tactic in mind begs the question as to why they just decided to include dodging in the game and not just outright remove it and say, yeah, Sekiro combat baby! I honestly don't know how a solo victory without Spectre as a 30-second tank is possible with this second phase when they don't want to parry, since it seems insurmountable for all the wrong reasons. Yet the general bullshit boss attacks don't end this chapter with her, but continue with Simon. Simon in both my playthroughs was absolute joke to fight. Much like Victor, most of his attacks were dodgeable, good enough choreographed, and his first phase was overall a satisfying experience. However, his arsenal of 3 or 4 parallel attacks that I have to keep track of in his second phase, that can cover half of the arena, is the worst way to present a more difficult fight just for the sake of making it difficult. And yet despite these parallel attacks, Simon's difficulty is still a joke. I cleared him on my 3rd attempt during my initial playthrough and also in New Game Plus. Though I get why Simon is such a lackluster boss. It's because they've put all of their time and effort into creating the final boss in Lies of P, which is by far the best boss in the entire game. The Nameless Puppet is the most formidable boss in the entire game and also a runner-up for a ranking of FromSoft's best bosses. It mirrors our weapon fighting style with a unique dual-wielding approach in his second phase. Dude, it challenged me to perform at my best to have a chance to defeat it, whilst from start to finish, it presented me with a fair fight throughout. It is an impressive feat that no other boss managed to accomplish in the entire game, which is to be expected when thinking about the inspiration used for the Nameless Puppet. The boss is a harmonious amalgamation of Sword Saint Ishin, particularly this specific attack in the puppet's second phase reminded me of him, Soul of Cinder, and the Bloodborne Hunter. It represents the pinnacle of difficulty by having so many dangerous attack options, the frustration of suffering from 30+ defeats, and subsequently the satisfaction of killing it. The exhilaration of defeating him was unparalleled to any other boss I had fought in this game. Yet, this boss is not without its flaws. It shares Laxasia's issue of overly harsh attack tracking, which is particularly noticeable for specific attacks like the spear laser shot. Despite this, however, the overall experience remains an astonishing one, encapsulating the epitome of what makes a boss battle memorable and challenging. This is the proof for me that the devs at Neowis and Round 8 really get From Software's formula and have the skills to make their own version of it that can hold up to the quality of FromSoft's games. Overall, however, the boss fights in Lies of P are all across the place. A minority are perfect, and many others have some weird kinks and/or horrible design choices. While bosses feel carefully crafted overall to execute a fluent dance between the player and the boss, they sometimes suffer from a few hiccups, ruining the pacing of this dance. And just like in Bloodborne, the best bosses in Lies of P are humanoid characters, like the Nameless Puppet, Victor, the Black Rebel Brotherhood, and Laxasia's first phase. Those are fights that execute a fluent dance between us and them perfect, which offers the most engaging and enjoyable combat experiences. However, a recurrent issue with most bosses are their attack tracking, sometimes too big HP pools, weapons not doing enough damage, and poorly choreographed attacks, which we have already discussed enough. While bosses in general are not too hard to handle, they still feel challenging, not because of their inherent skill requirement, but because of the issues many of them have. Certain bosses pack in too excessive amount of HP, which, combined with attack sequences that are sometimes poorly choreographed, it creates unnecessary confusion rather than a clear-cut challenge, which is the cause for most players' death. This is especially true for airborne attacks, which are not only difficult to keep an eye on, but also hard to get the timing right for a dodge. Except in the case of the Black Rebel Brotherhood, whose design evidently sidesteps this problem, but isn't as well implemented for other bosses. As a result, the difficulty with most bosses does not stem from their inherent complexity or skill requirement, but from the issues mentioned, which in turn artificially inflates the challenge, making encounters feel more tedious than tough. Yet contrasting my critique for horrible bosses are the other great boss encounters, of which an unmentioned one is the clown mini-boss on Rosabelle Street. He strikes a fine balance in difficulty, featuring a modest amount of health and cleverly designed and deceptive attacks. This mini-boss, as well as the other praised bosses, show again that the guys at Neowis and Round 8 can create a well-orchestrated boss fight that relies solely on player skill and strategy, rather than endurance. And reaching the skill level is ultimately what makes a boss fight both fair, satisfying to overcome, and memorable. Plus, since the devs at Neowis and Round 8 are still new to this game genre and lack the vast experience From Software has, it is a testament to their skills that they still managed to create such a great, yet flawed game. I'm really looking forward to the sequel to Lies of P and how they will improve in the future. While it sounds like I wish to end this video here, there is still the initial question from the beginning I owe you the answer to. Is Lies of P identical to Bloodborne? And the final answer to this question is sort of. The game carves out its identity as being similar to Bloodborne, while clearly distinguishing itself from being a direct Bloodborne copycat. One evidence for me to come to this conclusion, next to its lore, is the presence of a carry rate limit. This design choice hampered me to emulate the swift and agile pure dex gameplay that Bloodborne allowed me right from the start and without any hindrances. This limitation is at first glance such a stupid decision from the developers, punishing especially players like me seeking to have fast and agile movements at our disposal that allow for combat fluidity similar to Bloodborne. Additionally, this encumbrance cap also negatively affected the viability of employing more than one weapon at once for me, which provided me with even less of an incentive to dive deeper into the weapon assembly mechanics to create unique combinations. Whilst Bloodborne encourages us to test its weapons regularly by not restricting us in that way. Also, due to the fact that despite having many weapon combination options, the feel and variety of handling these new weapons never felt right to me, which forced me to stick to my starter weapon for the majority of my first playthrough, since I never found a dex weapon build satisfying my attack speed and reach criteria. A somewhat forced decision that also affected my overall negative experience towards the massive HP and weapon damage discrepancy. Another aspect that bothered me constantly was that the rally mechanic only applies to guarding instead of receiving damage in general. deviating again from Bloodborne's aggressive playstyle and instead promoting a more cautious playstyle like in Sekiro, with Lies of P's huge emphasis on executing perfect parries instead of dodging attacks. But as soon as I started to draw this parallel, it dawned upon me what kind of gameplay the studio aimed for. Instead of going for an identical copy of Bloodborne in all of its aspects, not just its lore, they decided to implement a combat system reflecting the broad spectrum of the Soulsborne genre. In their endeavor, they convincingly excelled at emulating the kind of gameplay experience we could expect from a From Software title. Lies of P's combat integrates the precise blocking and left-arm weaponry from Sekiro, the delayed boss attacks and weapon arts from Elden Ring, somewhat the different character build options from Dark Souls, and lastly, Bloodborne's wellness system with an emphasis on using diverse and unique weapons. And as soon as I tackled combat on these aspects, did everything click with me. I began to engage more with its unique features, such as the Fable arts when I got a good one, which allowed me to appreciate the combat system's own merits rather than seeing it strictly through the lens of a Bloodborne comparison. The game's identity, therefore, stands as a hybrid beast, channeling the aggressive fluidity and gothic themes of Bloodborne's design and lore, the defensive precision of Sekiro, and the rich RPG complexity of Dark Souls and Elden Ring, resulting in a unique flavor that pays homage to its roots while standing on its own distinct gaming experience, elevating it from a comparison of a cheap, trend-chasing Souls-like copycat to a great game you would be excused for thinking that actually From Software created it. Throughout my time with Lies of P, I sometimes really felt like I was playing a From Software game, and particularly a sequel to Bloodborne. As such, I honestly believe that they can stand as a big pillar in the Soulsborne genre if they continue to improve the necessary components in the formula and keep everything what's great about Lies of P as it is in future installments. While Bloodborne's future, be it a remaster, a sequel, or a PC port, remains unclear, it is comforting to know that its influence and impact spawns new games with not necessarily the identical vision, but at the very least with the same spirit. And with Neowiz and Round 8 having confirmed a sequel to Lies of P with its true ending, I'm really looking forward towards the next step the studio will make. But until then, I will return my attention back to Elden Ring and make more videos about it, whilst also expanding more into this video format, since writing and making this video was hopefully as much fun for you as it was for me. So subscribe if you want to hear more about my thoughts about Lies of P, Elden Ring, or any other Soulsborne game I decide to cover in the future. I wish you a good day, and I will see you in the next video, after I awake from my forced upon slumber, willed by my own puppeteer, known as my brain.